A Fabula Est Princeps, Maleficarum, Part 1, written and narrated by Therence, Terry B. Palino. Introduction. Hi, hello, and welcome everybody to the first part of the first episode of A Fabula Est Princeps, entitled Maleficarum. In this part, we'll first be meeting Inquisitor Taddeo of the Imperial Inquisition of the Blaze Empire. We'll meet his most trusted companions and the nature of his work in the supercontinent of Sancto. We're also going to get our first look at the island country of Fidalaro, where the young Inquisitor has been sent. So anyway, I hope you all are ready for the beginning of this wild ride. Self-promotion and quick update. Before we begin though, if you've enjoyed my work so far, please feel free to do the following. Like my videos, share my videos, subscribe to my channel, hit that bell for notifications. I recently started a Patreon account so that generous viewers out there can make donations. Don't worry though, it won't be mandatory. However, it would certainly help my cause as I'm not exactly in a good place right now. I wouldn't have to resort to this if my current situation hadn't taken such a dire turn. In any case, I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you have any suggestions or complaints, please post it down below in the comments section. Chapter 1. The Scene on the Beach. Inquisitor Taddeo and his faithful companions have been sent to the island country of Fidalaro, far to the east of Battleworth City. They have come to bring food, medicine, and other supplies after the island country had been ravaged by famine, disease, and a recent freak typhoon. Most importantly though, the young Inquisitor has come after news has reached the imperial capital about witchcraft and heresy. From the letters of Inquisitor Taddeo. 10/8/2293, Era of Salvation, inside the Town Hall of Bass, Fidalaro. To Lady High Inquisitor Madame Niobe Dumont, Box number 36, Inquisitorial Office of Battleworth City. Greetings from the faraway eastern island country of Fidalaro, Lady High Inquisitor Dumont. Yes, I do recall you seem to dislike it when people add too many honorifics to your name or when they mention your full name too many times. I also remember that you dislike whimsical or wordy reports, but I might have to disappoint you on that last. In any case, the Chenodia and the other ships accompanying her arrived here around 3 days ago, just a few hours after we exited the Abyss. The crew and passengers were anxious to get off the ship, but it took us at least a good 8 hours before we reached the shore. What we weren't prepared for, though, was the sight that would greet us when we got closer to the island. By that point, I was ready to shave off my growing mustache and beard, which had grown out during our transition across the Abyss. You've known me long enough to know that I never really like to shave when passing across that strange place. It's just something I don't do, no matter the reason. I had put the razor to my neck where the irritating patch of hair began, when Captain Hart's cabin boy barged into my room calling out to me. I nearly succeeded in slitting my own throat out of surprise. I shouted at the already bewildered cabin boy and asked him what was going on and what did he think he was doing. I also made a mental note to lock the door to my cabin. The cabin boy stammered as he spoke, telling me to come to the upper deck quickly to see what was happening on the beach of the island country. Putting down my razor and putting on the coat hanging behind my door, I followed the cabin boy to the upper deck of the Chenodia. Captain Hart was already there and handed me a spyglass. I looked and was both surprised and horrified by what I saw. A large crowd had gathered on the beach. There were dozens upon dozens of people, perhaps even numbering in the hundreds, milling about on the beach. I saw through the spyglass that there were men, women, and even a few children darting about the great throng. What disturbed me, though, was what they were all gathered around. They all encircled an unlit pyre upon which a young woman had been tied to a wooden stake with a crude rope. We were still quite a ways off, but I could hear the young woman's screams and pleas for help on the wind. It was apparent now just what was happening. The crowd had come to see the young woman burn at the stake. The gathered crowd was staring at our ships as we approached. I was asked what we were to do then, and I answered that we would come ashore onto the beach on a boat. We would see what the commotion on the beach was. Of course I knew what it looked like, Inquisitor Dumont. They probably thought she was some kind of witch and wanted to punish her for any perceived harm she may have caused. But you and I both know that's not how that works. Magic, and by extension witchcraft, are very difficult to prove in court. Acts of magic do leave behind evidence, but these need to be studied very carefully before being considered undeniable proof. Eyewitness accounts are acceptable, but witnesses with questionable motives and or questionable states of mind are automatically disregarded by the Inquisition. As with all executions, a magistrate, marshal, or even an inquisitor should be present at the site of the execution to show the legality of the procedure. I saw no such individual in the crowd. Also, executing a witch, warlock, or any kind of spellcaster required the presence of an imperial cleric or anyone who knew the ceremony of silencing. It is imperative that an evil wizard first be severed from their source of power, be it the dead, devils, or, God forbid, a dragon. Failure to do this and simply burning one at the stake might not only allow the spellcaster to continue existing as an evil spirit, but might even result in them becoming even more powerful than before. And, from what I could tell, there was no one of that sort on the beach. I gathered my companions Florence, Solaire, Aurelio, Zafina, Siv, and Cato and boarded the boat and headed for the beach. No doubt you are already somewhat familiar with the members of my retinue. I had chosen dozens of others to come with me on the expedition, but these 6 were the ones I trusted the most and whose skills complemented my own best. I'm not saying the others I took with me weren't good. It was just that I had worked with these individuals for a long time now and know how reliable they can be to an inquisitor like me. Sir Florence is a Dampier from the town of Junescu in Teldoras, and is a veteran of the Silent War, which was led by none other than the current emperor, Valerio Blaise III. Standing at nearly 7 feet and clad head to toe in heavy plate armor, Sir Florence is an imposing figure, though I have rarely met a kinder man. He is an adept of the Orange Song and is both a skilled healer as well as a fearsome warrior. Miss Solaire is a changeling who grew up in Davistan in the northeastern tip of Nemelreth near to the Heartlands. She is an extremely intelligent woman, although she is also possessed of more than a few peculiar eccentricities that I find worrying. Miss Solaire recently completed her studies in the island country of Industria in the Heartlands, and is thus knowledgeable in the Yellow Song, being a skilled engineer and craftswoman. Zafina is a Cambian from a poor family in Castitas, but became a prodigy in the Green Song as she grew older. She's a talented tracker and trapper, and has a deep understanding of wildernesses and the various beasts that call them home. Of all my companions, though, I must admit that I trust her the least, as she has gotten me and the others in a fair amount of trouble over the years. Aurelio is an Aeon whose family hails from El Barro, but, as he grew up, found his calling in Caritas, where he honed his craft in the Violet Song. This resulted in him being a veteran spiritualist and having a better grasp of the concepts of dying, death, and decay than any of us would care to have. Despite his macabre interests, however, Aurelio is a very personable man, and many found him pleasant company in Battleworth City when I first met him. Siv is an Amazon who prefers not to speak of her origins. All that can be said of her is that she is one of the rare masters of the Red Song, being both a powerful and skillful combatant. Siv is rarely given to conversation, and is either put off by unwanted company, or most just find her off-putting altogether. Cato is a hob and an expert in the Indigo Song. Much like Siv, however, the man is given to little conversation, and, for some reason or another, refuses or simply cannot speak. I do not know if this is one of the ways the Indigo Song expresses itself, but in the years I've worked with him, Cato has never uttered a single word. Then, of course, there's me, the blue adept in my very own party. I have discovered that adepts of different colors are often quite effective in a variety of tasks, as their abilities complement each other well. So while a man with command over the elements of lightning, fire, and cold is powerful, he becomes even more potent in the presence of a man who can utilize light itself to heal and protect his allies, a woman who can create and control powerful machines, a woman who can speak to nature itself and its creatures, a man who can communicate with the dead and command them in battle, an unbeatable swordswoman, and a man who can disappear in the shadows. Need I say more? We arrived on the beach as Florence and Siv rowed the boat and the people at the beach stared at us. Even the woman who was tied to the stake momentarily stopped screaming to look at us newcomers. No doubt they saw the imperial flag flying on our ships, which depicted the Messiah's downward-pointing golden sword, and the inquisitorial flag on the Cenodia that showed an open eye with a stylized eye in the pupil. As if that wasn't enough, I held up from my neck the inquisitorial seal, depicting the same eye and eye of the inquisitorial flag on the Cenodia. This made the people on the beach bow to us, in part as we passed. Something I was grateful for, as I was worried they would put up some kind of resistance. You know me well, Inquisitor Dumont. I don't like messes, even if they are required sometimes. So of course I introduced myself to them. I told them that I am an Inquisitor of the Imperial Inquisition of Battleworth City. I demanded to know just what was happening and what they were doing. I already knew what they'd say, of course, but it's good to be sure, and asking for people to explain themselves often calms them down. "This woman here is a witch, and we're going to burn her," shouted one man, accompanied by various swear words. "We will be glad to be rid of her." "Burn her!" shouted a woman near me and spat, the spittle landing on the pants leg of a man near her. "She's the cause of all our troubles." There were shouts of affirmation all around her, and cries of "burn the witch" or something to that effect. Oh, how I hated these kinds of people. That said, I couldn't really blame them either. When enough bad things, be it starvation, sickness, or violence has happened, people tend to look for something or someone to blame. Sometimes it's the fickle behavior of nature itself. Other times they curse fate, and there are even those who become angry at God. Sadly though, more often than not, they shift the blame on other people even if said people have done little to deserve such hatred. They are often blamed for such disasters as storms, droughts, earthquakes, or even volcanic eruptions, simply because they are different enough to be singled out. Sometimes they just look or move different, have a lifestyle not everyone agrees with, or are simply newcomers in a given place, but they almost always become primary targets for ill-informed witch hunts such as these. But I digress, good Inquisitor. In his thunderous voice, Sir Florence called for order, punctuated with thuds from the shaft of his fearsome halberd. To this the crowd immediately became quiet, their eyes focused on us now instead of the woman at the stake. None of them now dared spare a hateful glance at their witch, now that there were newcomers who seemed more dangerous than a mere witch. I immediately demanded to see their evidence for their accusations. I made it clear to them that killing a person without due cause was murder in the laws of both man and God. And murder, I reminded them all, was indeed punishable by death according to imperial laws. I also demanded to see a man of the law among them, be it a judge or cleric, as only they have the right to call for an execution. The men and women in the crowd looked at each other and around themselves foolishly like children. Then a man spoke up, his voice sure and with a hint of self-righteousness. He made rude gestures at the woman tied to the stake and said he had spectral evidence to present against her. I had to stop myself from laughing. This idea of spectral evidence has gone on long enough. I do not know how it became popular or why some people see it as truth, even though it was just a joke made by one of the founding members of the Imperial Inquisition. If only the Messiah's message of compassion and kindness traveled as far as ridiculous rumors like spectral evidence, but again, I digress. Anyway, the man stated that he had dreams wherein the woman at the stake was strangling him. He said that only those in league with devils or dragons were capable of strangling a man in his dreams while he's sleeping. The man spat on the ground near the gathered kindling that surrounded the woman at the stake. I was about to counter this with words of my own when it was Siv, the Amazon woman, who stepped forward to speak against the crowd. She told them of how she often dreamed of Queen Reginleif of the Vikings assaulting her in her sleep. She then asked if that meant that the queen of the Vikings was some kind of witch, even though Vikings were renowned for their disdain of anything magical or supernatural. Siv also told them of her dreams about Baroness Latoya of Gambol, whom many men, both noble and common, lusted for, caressing her intimately in her sleep. Did that mean that the Baroness was also some kind of witch? Zafina, who probably couldn't help herself, burst out laughing at first. Then Aurelio, who stood beside her, followed suit. Then Siv herself realized how funny she had worded her statement and started laughing too. Solaire has a poor grasp of humor, but then she grinned too. If Sir Florence laughed, I did not see it, as his head and body were encased in his heavy armor. Cato turned away, a hand covering his already covered face, and was probably laughing too. The laughter was infectious, and soon several people in the crowd started laughing as well. Then nearly half of them were laughing as they realized how silly the notion of spectral evidence was. Finally, almost all of the people at the crowd were laughing once they saw the silliness of it all. Siv went on to accuse the man who presented the spectral evidence of having impure thoughts towards the woman tied to the stake, causing the surrounding crowd to laugh even harder. I wanted to laugh too at the time. I really did. It hurt my chest not to laugh, but I had to be serious. The man who made the accusation stepped back, looking not just foolish but utterly stupid in the face of it all. I knew he was hurt, but sometimes a person needed that. Letting a person know their folly was one way they would know how to become better people. Then a woman from the crowd stepped forward and threw something at my feet. Sir Florence raised his halberd, ready to defend me, and Zafina's hand went to the bow mounted on her back. Siv tensed up too, and Aurelio took a step back, a hand going into his robes to reach for one of his deadly throwing knives. Miss Solaire simply adjusted her glasses, but I knew her well enough that this was her way of sizing up the opposition and computing for the best outcome of a possible fight. Cato already began to fade from my vision, a sign that he had already begun an indigo song, and that he was ready for combat if it came to that. I, for one, did not move a muscle, both because I was taken completely by surprise, and also because I knew that showing weakness now was folly. I looked down at my feet to see the object the woman had thrown. It was a doll composed of hay and string. It looked fairly new, the red string tying it together, standing out against the sand of the beach. The woman then said that they had found the doll and the remains of the alleged witch's hut after they had burned it down. Then it was Aurelio's turn to speak and stepped forward to pick up the doll between my feet. He asked again if they had found the doll after the witch's hut had been burned down. The accuser immediately answered yes, and that the presence of that doll was indeed evidence that that woman tied to the stake was indeed a witch. Aurelio looked at the doll and turned it front to back, then began asking questions of his own. First among his questions was that, if the hut had been burned down, why was the doll still intact? Aurelio acknowledged that sorcery could have protected the doll, but what made it questionable was how new the doll looked. He then told them of how easy it was to create dolls like the one the woman had thrown, using just hay, string, and a pair of scissors. Aurelio even added that all one needed was take pieces of cloth and shape them as clothes around the hay and string doll, and you'd have a child's toy worth 10 copper coins. I nodded then at that and told them that if it is somehow proven that the doll didn't really belong to the woman tied to the stake, it would be considered falsified evidence. I reminded them again of imperial laws and told them that false accusations with falsified evidence was considered another capital crime in the Blaze Empire and was right up there with heinous crimes like murder and rape. I also reminded them that, depending on the weight of their crimes, they can also be put to death for wrongfully accusing an innocent person. There was a tense moment of silence then, as it seemed that the woman who had thrown the doll was clearly angry at me and my companions. Just then, an old man hobbled onto the beach. He was struggling as his sandaled feet sank into the sand, slowing him down further. He wore simple gray trousers, a brown jerkin, a black coat with a matching black hat. He used a cane to help him walk, but it didn't seem to be helping him at all now, and around his neck was a pendant that displayed the Messiah's golden sword. He was likely either a pastor or minister for the Messianic faith. The old pastor shouted for everyone to stop now, stop immediately, even as he panted and struggled with the sand. Before I could say anything, Cato appeared at the man's side and helped him navigate the sand. To this the old pastor thanked him profusely, telling him what a helpful young boy he was. I could surmise Cato was probably also scowling profusely at being once again mistaken for a child. As the old pastor approached, the crowd parted for him, and it didn't take him long to reach our party and the pyre. The old man declared to the people that the woman tied to the stake was innocent, as they had no real proof that she was actually a witch. He then told them to disperse and go home, as there was nothing for them to do here. It was not their place to judge anyone of witchcraft, let alone execute someone for an unproven crime. Once again, the people in the crowd looked at one another foolishly. However, they did not seem to want to move. I sighed at that, realizing that I once again had to use inquisitorial authority to get them to move along. I spoke loudly, telling that as an inquisitor of the Blaze Empire, I could have them all arrested on the spot for obstructing the investigation of an inquisitor. And yes, Lady Niobe, I know it's a very unlikely charge, but I had to say something to get them moving. Thankfully, after threatening them all with arrest, all the onlookers fled, even the man who presented spectral evidence and the woman who threw the doll at us. It was only after the entire crowd was dispersed and it was just us, the old pastor, and the woman tied to the stake that I relaxed a bit. I told Sir Florence and Zafina to free the woman at the stake and heal any injury she might have had. It was also by that point that the old pastor saw me and my party for who we were. I introduced myself immediately, telling him that I was an inquisitor sent by the Blaze Empire to investigate reports of witchcraft in Fidalaro. I also told him that we had also brought food, medicine, and other relief goods, as we also received reports of storms, famine, and disease in the island country. The old pastor's face immediately brightened when he heard why we had come and looked up at the sky to praise Yeshua for bringing us here in this time of trial. As soon as Florence and Zafina cut the woman free, she almost fell over from exhaustion. Upon closer inspection, we saw that she had soiled herself, probably in terror, and that her body was riddled with bruises and rope burns. People in the crowd had probably had their way with her before they decided to see her burned at the stake. I would see to it later to find the people responsible for the fiasco, and I made a mental note of both the man who claimed spectral evidence and the woman who threw the doll at us. The old pastor introduced himself as Reverend Erasmo Escudero, and that he had been a pastor for the Messiah for Fidalaro for more than a decade. He told us how happy he was now that the Blaze Empire had sent aid and that they would soon get to the bottom of what was troubling the island country. He then told us to follow him to the nearby town of Bass, less than half a mile away, and that we should bring the ships there to unload them of their much-needed cargo. I told Sir Florence and Zafina to take the woman to the boat and take her to the Chenodia so I could question her later. That and maybe see to her injuries. I also told them to relay the old pastor's message and bring the supply ships to the town of Bass. Civ, Cato, Aurelio, and Soler already said after Reverend Escudero when I looked over my shoulder to see a most dismaying sight. There were 3 other burnt stakes not far from where I stood, and, a little further away, was the remains of a 4th. This wasn't the first woman to be burned at the stake for witchcraft on the beach. We had arrived too late to save those that came before her. I shook my head and vowed to find out what was happening in Fidalaro and what I could do to stop it. Regards, Inquisitor Tadeo. To be continued. So, if you're enjoying this story so far and would like more of this, don't forget to like my videos, share my videos, subscribe to my channel, hit the bell for notifications. So stay tuned and I'll see you all in the next episode of Fabula Est Princeps, Maleficarum.